Thanks, Donna, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Impact Design Hub Racial Equity Exchange. On today's webinar, we're going to discuss how designers can proactively use their skills to generate greater racial equity in the communities that they work with. We've got a very inspiring lineup of 3 designers to talk about the ways they're doing this today, and we'll walk through their specific initiatives. We'll also talk about how you might apply these approaches and practices to your work. My name is Rinda Bagela. I'm with Enterprise Community Partners, which is a partner with the Impact Design Hub and a national nonprofit with the mission to create opportunity for low and moderate income people through affordable housing and diverse, thriving communities. At Enterprise, we see racial equity as both a practice of how we engage in our work and an outcome in which race does not predict one's success. To support our work in being more intentional, we've been exploring various tools and resources to integrate explicit consideration of racial equity in our decision-making, from policies, practices, and programs. Working on dismantling structural racial inequities from any seat you're in isn't an easy thing to take on, and the paths to creating or driving solutions aren't linear. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion and exchange and learning about the approaches and practices presented from our guest speakers. And at that, I'll pass it over to Ted.
Thanks, Rhonda. Just wanted to say quickly that we're so glad that so many people have joined this conversation, and especially to Maya and Christopher Scott, Christopher from Enterprise, who decided to take on this series with Impact Design Hub to talk about racial equity, something that is incredibly potent and important right now and has been for some time, and is also a challenging conversation to have for some. And I'm really grateful that so many people have signed on to be part of this, and especially to our guests, Amy and Tamaya, June and Emily, to be a part of this conversation, and hopefully we can continue the conversation beyond this, because this is, if you all are here, the fact that you all are here is probably because you're thinking about this a lot, but there are many people that might not be thinking about this, and so that's sort of our call to action as well, is to have this conversation among this community and then go out to those who are not thinking about it and share that. So I'll give it to Maya. She can take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. So hi, everybody. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Maya Sharfi. I work with the Design Initiatives Office of Enterprise as a creative director, and I worked with our fellowship director, Christopher Scott, on this series with Impact Design Hub and on this initiative. So I just want to give a little bit of context for the Design for Equity initiative within Enterprise. We think that the issue of racial equity and equity in general is one of the most important issues within built environment design, and we wanted to use our role as a convener to really convene designers around this issue and around thinking about how we could be more proactive forces for greater equity. So a number of years ago, we started this conversation with another Impact Design Hub series, and then also a convening that we hosted in Boston with the Brunner Loeb Forum, looking at the challenges that Boston as a city faces around equity and development and gentrification. And we followed up with a day and a half long summit at the Architecture Boston Expo, looking specifically at how designers and planners could be active forces for more equity within their work. And then this summer, working with Christopher Scott, who is the director of the Enterprise Rose Architectural Fellowship, we decided to take on this issue again and to really shine a spotlight on ourselves and our programs. So the Rose Fellowship is the flagship program of Enterprise Community Partners in the Design Initiatives area. And it's a 3-year fellowship. For those of you who haven't heard about it before, it's a 3-year fellowship that places emerging designers in community development organizations and affordable housing organizations, and they're able to use their skills to benefit low-income communities. It's one of the best career paths within social impact design, and it's really a great way to get involved in these issues and to use your skills on something that you have passion and interest on. So we decided to look at our numbers for the Rose Fellowship and to really shine the spotlight, the racial equity spotlight on ourselves. And so I don't think it'll come as a surprise to that many people that the U.S. architecture field has a way to go when it comes to being racially diverse and actually representing the racial diversity of this country, we found that the Rose Fellowship was doing a lot better than we thought, or that we had hoped that it would be doing quite well, and it actually is very close to representing the percentage of racial minorities within the U.S. But doing this series with Impact Design Hub kicked off a season of introspection for us, and we really started thinking a lot about how do we want to operate, how do we want to instrumentalize and operationalize our commitment to racial equity in the work that we do, both within the Rose Fellowship and also within our larger programs. And a great thing to report is that we just closed the application round for the 2018 fellowship and found that our applications by candidates of color were up, and we had a 200% increase in Black applicants for the Rose Fellowship. So we wanted to take this moment within our organization and then actually bring people together around it to ask, how can we as a field do better? So with Impact Design Hub, we surveyed the field to find initiatives that addressed racial equity through design. And I'm just going to share a little bit of what we found because I think it'll be great grounding for the conversation that we're going to have. So we got about 65 responses, and we asked respondents, is your initiative internally focused? So is it using your resources to make your staff or your organization or your operations more equitable, or is it externally focused? So using your skills and capacity to address wider issues of equity. And what's interesting is that a large proportion of our respondents said that their initiative was actually doing both. About 60% said that. 35% of organizations had solely externally focused efforts, and what's interesting is only about 5% said that they had internally focused initiatives. So I think that's something interesting and something for our field to think about. And then we also asked, do you track any numbers related to this? Because one of the things that we think a lot about is that design is full of great intentions, but we also need to have moments where we go back and we see whether those good intentions influence the reality, right? Did we produce the outcomes we hope to produce? And so we found that about half of you who responded to the survey did track some kind of numbers or metrics, whether that was demographics or indicators or outcomes of your projects. Half of you were either doing that or were in the process of creating some kind of tracking process, but you were tracking very wildly different things. So there's actually a number of initiatives that are in discussion with research partners to try to figure out what to track. And I think in some ways this is really tied to where some of the core challenges our field faces when it comes to racial initiatives to address racial equity come up. So when we asked what are your challenges, we heard a couple of things. Of course, we heard the usual challenges that our organizations face of funding, staff time, all of that I think would not be a surprise. But we also found a couple of other common challenges. So one was the challenge of culture change. The inherent stigma and discomfort that many people have discussing race explicitly is a big barrier that a lot of organizations have, especially when it comes to internal change in organizations. A second challenge that we saw was the challenge of trust and the built-up history of mistrust between communities of color, especially disempowered or low-income communities of color, and government initiatives and agencies and previous projects that have had great intentions that haven't gone anywhere. One group said that our team must not only help in the problem solving of issues, but also the collective reconciliation of healing past harms. So that's a weight that we carry when we do this kind of work often. And then finally, we heard that complexity was an issue. So it was difficult for organizations to toggle between the macro and the micro in their projects and to know what is in scope and what is out of scope in this initiative, because oftentimes you're taking on an issue that's a part of a much larger systemic issue. This was really tied to the question of not knowing how to evaluate this work. So how do we know that we've done what we intended to do, or that we're doing good work? And this was also tied to the challenge of multi-sector collaboration. So how do we work, these issues are multi-layered. So how do we work with other organizations when we can be working on one aspect of this issue, but we need to be partnering with other skill sets and other intervention points? Finally, one comment stuck out at me, which was that sometimes when we're working with nonprofits or government agencies, they're not necessarily used to working with designers or creatives on these issues, and so sometimes they're not as able to envision different approaches, and especially the value added of creative and design thinking to these issues. So when we started to see what people were working on, we started to see that there were a couple of common intervention points. And one of the things I want to throw out there is that we don't see these as the only intervention points, but we see these as common places that a lot of the initiatives, common buckets that they started to fall into. So there were internal intervention points. So there are organizations that are working on workplace-based initiatives to make their workplaces more equitable. So a great example of this is CUP's Fellowship for Change, which targets designers from minority and other underrepresented backgrounds. But then we also started to see initiatives that worked on the design field as a whole, initiatives that we started to call the Redesigning Design Initiatives. So whether this is to create a new methodology for design that would be more inherently equitable, or to focus on issues of participatory process. So for organizations that do a lot of public engagement, how do we make sure that that engagement is actually equitable? And then we also started to see initiatives that focused on the politics of representation. So making sure that who is being represented, both especially within the design fields, is equitable. So publications and initiatives focusing on that. And then when we looked at external intervention points, we started to see a couple of other buckets. So the first is design as a form of capacity building. So this is initiatives that train people and others in design and construction skills as a form of capacity building. So Juxtaposition Arts and Asian Neighborhood Design are groups that work specifically with youth, or the Delta Design Build Workshop is an initiative that we'll hear about today that works with grown people. And then we also started to see design as a form of awareness building. So using the power of design and visual communication to express and reframe and explain and illustrate. So this is everything from exhibitions to publications to competitions. How can design share a new approach to a specific issue, call attention to a specific issue? And then the last two intervention points we saw were systems thinking, so using design thinking and those specific approaches to come up with new approaches to issues of racial equity. So the Health Equity Design Lab is a great example. And then in a related sense, we also started to see what we began to call strategic interventions. So strategic interventions take on a certain aspect of a larger systemic problem, which has a designed element to it. So the work of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice in New York, who's partnering with Gang Studio on spatial design solutions to address criminal justice issues, is a great example. And then you'll also see today in June Grant of Blink Lab's work, a great strategic intervention. And one of the things that I think June's work exemplifies is that these intervention points are not one size fits all. In a lot of ways, June's work is a strategic intervention because it focuses on building, but it's really about systemic change and about moving from the scale of the building upwards into policy change in the financial system. So we thought that these were great ways to think about how designers can take the next step in making their skills relevant and useful. And we hope that it's a useful way for you to start to think about how you might want to impact issues of racial equity with your skills. So we invited 3 initiatives to talk about their work, and we think that they represent a couple of these different intervention points. And so we're going to start with design impact, and we're excited to have Amy Houghton and Tamaya Denard here with us today. Design impact is a design consultancy which recently published Meta Themes, Designing for Equitable Social Change, which is a report that reflects on themes that cut across multiple projects that their organization has done in the last few years, especially the racial equity component of it. And it generates a framework for equity work within the social sector that we think is really useful for other organizations to learn about as well. So let me turn it over to you guys.
you. Okay. Thank you for that introduction, Maya. I'm glad to be with you all today, and my colleague and I are going to just talk with you about how MetaThemes came to be and what we hope to do with it both externally but also internally within our own organization. So MetaThemes actually, it's a research-based project. Sorry, hold on here. Thanks, Amy. It's a research-based project that we embarked on, and it wasn't really about any sort of particular service or thing as it was about how do we change the way nonprofits and other organizations provide services in a more equitable way. How do we give them the tools they need to approach some tough conversations around power and privilege, and in a way that is more equitable and using design as the key. So really when we sat down and tried to think about what MetaThemes should be or what it could be, we noticed that across different projects that we worked on, be it community development or education or food access, we were hearing the same themes across these different projects. And then we felt a responsibility to do something with those themes and with the things that people were telling us in their living rooms. Because one thing we noticed, and I'm sure all of you do too, is that the status quo as it relates to delivering services to everyone was unacceptable. So how can we act differently, and how can we empower others to act differently? So creating the MetaThemes report, we started with 30 projects, and as you can see, it crossed a wide section of social challenges, so health and wellness, homelessness. These are all the things that we do at Design Impact in terms of social issues. Ultimately, of all those areas, we chose 13 projects to provide the insights for MetaThemes.
Yeah, and so as we started thinking about how can we best amplify community voice and tell the truth that we were hearing, as Tamaya said, from them across all these different sectors, in all these different ways, we wanted to be able to really get at the root of the problem, to get at the root of inequity. And so we knew in order to do that, we needed to use an equity lens as a theoretical framework in order to kind of tease out these truths that were cross-cutting across all these different sectors. And so the two approaches that we used to really inform or build that equity lens was human-centered design, which is at the heart of what we do in all of our projects. It's how we run processes. It's how we actually collect these stories from community members. And then also using an intersectional approach. So intersectionality, basically what it's all about is understanding that you can't just solve for racial injustice or sexism, classism, without really looking at understanding how all those different systems intersect. And so while we wanted to, for example, to solve for racial inequity, we also knew that we needed to do that from an intersectional perspective. Again, kind of looking at it from all the complexity and the way that it's actually created at a systems level. So we use this equity lens to basically inform how we then made sense of all these different community stories that we had collected over about 3 years of work, actually. And so where we ended up was basically with 6 meta-themes. Meta-themes are how we talk about these cross-cutting themes across all these different sectors. And so here you'll see those 6 meta-themes. And so I'm just going to touch on each one of these because we feel like they're really important. Again, basically because they are, this is the way that we amplify community voice. And so one is bridge norms, value me for who I am, not who I'm told to be, challenge me to grow, go beyond feedback, move from community voice to community leadership. So it's not just enough to get input throughout the process. We actually need to move beyond that to empowering communities in positions of leadership. Feed my soul, tap into my passion, tap into my power. This is really about seeing the creative agency in all of us and understanding how important that is. redesigning the system, decrease system complexity to increase engagement and dignity, give room to heal, consider my whole self, including my trauma and history. So understanding that sometimes we go in, maybe there needs to be some healing done before we move to action. And then finally, keep promises, show up every time and deliver on your word. So really how we understood meta-themes is this is really the what that is happening in our systems right now. So if we're solving for equity, we needed to understand what was happening so we could redesign for a more equitable change. So if meta-themes are the what, then the calls to action are really the how we show up in order to build equity. And so these calls to action were really in response to our feeling very much compelled to action once we teased out these cross-cutting themes. We didn't feel like it was enough to just leave us with that. Meta-themes really serving, again, as kind of guardrails for how we might do equity, but we also needed to provide some calls to action in terms of how we actually would do that. So here you see a set of calls to action, and each one of these calls to actions are in response to specific meta-themes, but we felt like, again, they were really powerful as a collective. Really, one of the ways we think about these are as design principles. So these are kind of serve as our design impact manifesto, and we definitely have used these to apply these to our work, as Tamaya referenced earlier. In doing that, as we started to think about, once we shared out these meta-themes and we created this report, and we should say that that was actually in partnership with United Way as Greater Cincinnati, who with us, we had partnered with them quite a bit over the years, and they knew that we were in all these different sectors collecting all this community voice. And so as they started to think about how they might restructure their funding mechanism, they agreed to support us in developing these meta-themes. And so we used the meta-themes to also help them as they started to think about how could they work to solve inequity in our city, in our region. But as we then moved beyond the report and started to think about, okay, what does meta-themes mean to us and how can we apply this to our own practice? Some of those calls to action really stood out as most important. So for example, look into the mirror, which is one of the first calls to action, I think really spoke to us in terms of we have to start internally at looking at ourselves before we're able to engage external partners in that work. And so some of the ways that we started to do that internally was really looking at what we did around talent acquisition and our efforts related to that. We had, up to that point, really focused on bringing in high levels of expertise in the social design and social innovation spaces. And so we had been investing a lot of time and resources trying to develop relationships with top-tier schools kind of in that space. But, you know, I think the meta-themes and the look into the mirror helped us pause and think about what does it mean to actually have a really high-impact team of folks that are working to create social equity. And so it broadened our definition in terms of what talent acquisition was to, I think, helped us to really heighten our investment around being inclusive, making sure that our team reflects the communities that we serve. And I think we all experience this tension as we start to recruit and retain talent, trying to bring in experts, people at the top of our fields, but also making sure that we, again, represent those that we're working to serve. And so I think it helped us pause on some of the efforts that we were doing to also look locally and understanding that sometimes people don't necessarily, that there are a lot of barriers and that there are certainly barriers when it comes to diversity in the design disciplines. And so I think as we learned around that, it helped us pivot a little bit in some of our strategies related to that. We also realized that there was a need to build organizational capacity around our own ways that we diffuse and distribute power internally. And so as a result, we did some organizational restructuring in order to build really participatory decision-making processes. We also knew that it was important to do some work around power and privilege on our team, and so we brought in some other partners in our community to help us do that, to really dig into our own power and privilege and how that shows up internally in our work and how we collaborate on our own team. And so generally, like, look into that mirror really inspired us to focus on a couple of those calls to action. So embrace our complexity, challenge our own biases, and refuse to pass them down, and work across difference. So we see those, that kind of set of calls to action, really focusing on our internal efforts. Some of our external efforts where this showed up, where the calls to action and meta themes showed up, was in recognize racism and sexism. So with partners really pushing to call out racism and sexism explicitly as we're working to solve for social change. Oftentimes as we're doing project work, it's implicit and certainly there because we always try to solve for the root of the problem, and so those stories of racism and sexism and how that plays out comes out. But sometimes that gets lost along the way as we move to action, and so make sure that basically that's kind of making sure that we stay true to being really explicit in our racial equity efforts. And finally, acknowledging our interventions can both help and hurt. I think this has been a really important call to action for us. Understanding that, you know, well-intentioned work can end in really have damaging implications. And so we started to look at the long-term impact of some of our projects and some of our partnerships, and learning ways that we can address, things that we can put in place to make sure that those interventions, both in the short and long term, are actually more helpful than they are hurtful. And just sharing out one tool that we've found to be helpful and we're looking to implement here is the Racial Equity Impact Assessment that Annie E. Casey issued. Something that you use at the very start of your effort to kind of ask some questions and put some groundwork in place to make sure that we're measuring the right thing, thinking about the right thing as we build these interventions.
A large part of that, too, was recognizing that we all have these roles in these systems that are institutionalized oppression. So where are we in that, and how are we not taking on the power dynamics of the people we hire in certain instances? So that was part of acknowledging that our interventions can both hurt and help. There are some challenges, though, to the work that we're doing. One of them is readiness. It's the hard truth as we're looking at the current climate in our country. People aren't quite ready. They weren't ready to hear about racial injustice, even though sometimes it's there, given power to actually name racism and name sexism. People weren't ready to do that. Even thinking about how poverty has become so politicized as of late, that no matter what the data or the facts are, it has to take a side. And one thing that we say as we address the climate and the readiness within our meta themes report is that you can't address concentrated poverty without addressing concentrated wealth. And there's difficulty with understanding that and accepting that in terms of the power dynamics. How might we build bridges also while disrupting the status quo? Is very difficult because you have to call things out, but at the same time you can't demonize people. You have to continue to build bridges in order to do this work and not work in silos. That's very difficult to do. And then for a lot of the work, this is an approach that we give nonprofits and social service agencies, but then how do we translate that into an actual toolkit for them to use to empower themselves and equip themselves to go out and do the work that we're asking you to do based on the meta themes report. So here's just a visual of what the meta themes report looks like. It's good for you to see it. It's available online as well in a digital form that you can download, which is on this link here. So that is really it for us. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much to Maya and Amy. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Emily Roush Elliott. Emily Roush Elliott is actually a former Rose Fellow, and she's the co-founder of the Delta Design Build Workshop based in Greenwood, Mississippi. It provides design build services to primarily Black communities in the Mississippi Delta, and it partners with Black leadership in the area and hires the primarily young Black population through construction apprentices. Emily, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Maya. It's great to be on this call, and as you said, certainly many thanks to Enterprise. If the fellowship hadn't brought me here, none of this would exist, at least not in this form. So I'm a social impact architect, and along with my husband, I'm the co-owner of actually 3 intertwined organizations. You can see all of them named here with their logos. The Delta Design Build Workshop is the nonprofit arm, while Design Build Solutions is the construction LLC, and R19 Architecture is the design firm. Utilizing these 3 entities, we work at the intersection of the market forces and public interest. We value process as much as product. We believe that waste is a social construct, and we prioritize a sensitive translation between unique local challenges and design in each of our projects. So Maya prompted us all to focus in on an issue, and the broad issue that we always focus on is that the built environment is one of the worst purveyors of inequities. We see that throughout the world and throughout the country, but geographically it really stands out here in Greenwood. We have a river that runs through downtown, and north of that river is primarily white and primarily quite wealthy, and south of that river is primarily Black and primarily low-wealth households. So as we worked on these projects, and you can see how we prioritized them on this slide, we worked on a number of projects looking at the built environment itself, that importance of elevating the way that a community can be involved throughout that process of, realizing a project, whatever that project might be, affordable housing, a community center, a park. Having the community, as you all were just talking about in meta themes at Design Impact, having the community play a leadership role is so important. And the way that that manifested for us early on in the fellowship, my Rose Fellowship, was that my husband started Design Build Solutions, and we hired people from the neighborhoods, and we ended up doing a lot of teaching and training in the construction field. So you can see some of our youth classes. Narrowing in even more specifically on what I want to talk about today, it's that here in the Mississippi, we want to respond to the narrative that the measure of success for many is how far away you can get. And when I say many, that's primarily the people that you see pictured here. It's young Black individuals, especially young Black males that we see are just not being welcomed into the systems and the structures that make up our society. So one way that we're trying to do this is the LEAP program. So LEAP stands for the LaFleur Energy Apprentice Program. LaFleur is our county. And as the former presenters also mentioned, and I think Maya did too, this work is always multivalent. And so we started looking at how we could respond to lots of different challenges at the same time. So we have a high unemployment rate here in Greenwood. And for a long time, I thought that that meant there weren't jobs, but actually there are jobs. So that's sort of the green and orange piece of this Venn diagram. Why that's an issue? A lot of that, I think, is just about racial inequities based on that sort of unwelcomeness and lack of opportunity being put out there for our young Black populations. And then that blue piece of it, we also said, well, we know about housing and we know about construction, so how do we pull these incredibly inefficient existing homes that we've tested over the years and even got some data on how much it costs to heat and cool those homes, how can that layer in? And so there in the middle is where we try to find LEAP. So a little bit about the nuts and bolts of LEAP. LEAP, I like to call it a pilot project, but in other ways it's sort of a 3rd or 4th generation of job training and home or even community improvement through the job training program. And of course, many other people around the country have tried this and do it in many different ways. But this is how LEAP turned out this time. So we had a classroom instructor, a field assistant, a life coach who was a counselor, and a job coach. And we had 6 apprentices. They worked on 16 homes to weatherize those homes, and they built 1 community project. Of course, as always, we have significant partners, employers, trainers. You never do anything alone. As Maya mentioned, narrowing in on the how, one thing that I wanted to make sure to say is that when we're selecting these energy apprentices, one thing that we've done is we've really just tried to get rid of systems as much as possible. I loved in the meta themes, you all said decrease system complexity. So we have a 1-page application, and we don't require any work or academic achievements. We don't require a permanent address or even a permanent phone number. And we never require drug testing of any of our apprentices or actually any of our longer-term employees either. So just a quick run-through of what happened in LEAP. As I said, it was 8 weeks. It began with some classroom time, and there I am teaching, and all of our apprentices. During this classroom time, we talked a lot. We did a lot of activities towards the apprentices getting the NCCER. And I always have to look that up, even though I've done this a million times. I always have to look up what NCCER stands for. And I didn't write it down. I'll pull it up. The NCCER certification, and most of them did. After the classroom time, they went out and they did home weatherizations. I already showed a picture of them with a homeowner. This is a different presentation that I pulled this from, but it starts to show for 3 different types of housing how much extra people are spending per month due to air infiltration. And the picture on the left is the typical for one of the neighborhoods we've concentrated on. So some of our lowest wealth households spending not 176 as their utility bill, but an extra 176 every month. Then we moved into carpentry training, a lot of painting, really just learning how to put something together. And to me, that's a magical moment because we're showing how powerful it is to impact the world around you, equipping people with some very tangible skills to do that, and then actually doing it. So this is the project that the LEAP apprentices completed. They cast the planters, they built the picnic table, and of course they built this whole pergola and painted the whole thing. This project is a lunch and break area for the employees of the local office of the Mississippi Department of Human Services. They didn't have anywhere to take breaks, and that's an important and stressful job, we know, and so we're really excited to partner with that office and build this pergola. So I want to end just thinking about the outcomes and the challenges. I think it's hard for me to separate some of the pros and the cons. You know, we're excited, but the big thing is that they're never enough. So quantitative, 5 young Black men earned NCCER certification through the LEAP program. 2 of the 5 apprentices now have full-time jobs, both with Milwaukee Electric Tool here in town. 1 of the apprentices works part-time with us. 16 families are enjoying less AC loss and lower energy bills during this hot summer. We're waiting on exact data on that because this project just finished about a month ago. And then the 1 new pergola exists at the MDHS office here in Greenwood. So that's quantitative, but qualitative is just important to us, of course. We're excited that this group that you see pictured here was excited at this moment. I think that the pride that you see as we completed this bench when all the phones came out, that's one of our biggest successes, and we're really excited about it. I mentioned life coaching and job coaching during the classroom times. The life coach is a counselor here in town, and the apprentices each had some private moments, and they got to just sit with her and talk with her about really anything they wanted. We said the prompt is, you know, what is a barrier in your life to full employment that everyone in this program says they're seeking? But they could talk about anything that they wanted. And then the job coaching was where they actually got ready to do interviews, and they did practice interviews and such. And so those benefits, I think, will be realized for years to come. I also think along those lines, the low-wealth homeowners, as you all mentioned in the meta themes, that sort of one-on-one relationship of treating them with dignity and respect, I think, is a qualitative outcome. So my challenges, as I said, are very much linked to our successes. So if only 2 of our 5 apprentices, or sort of 2.5, have jobs, that means we have about a 50% success rate, and that's not good enough. I will say over the years, as this is sort of our 3rd or 4th iteration, that's significantly better than it was in the past. We do keep getting longer. The first job training program we did was 3 days, and I think the second was 3 weeks. And this is our sort of 3rd official one, and it was 8 weeks. So if we do it again, it's going to be even longer, and we're looking for funding now. The limited scale is something that is a real challenge, but I hope we get to that in the conversation more of how we could scale up without losing a lot of the benefits. But then most of all, to me, the systemic unwelcoming attitude of our societal structures towards Black individuals will continue to perpetuate any challenges that we're facing faster than we can ever respond to them. And so that's a bigger picture question that I'm so glad people like Design Impact and Enterprise are thinking about.
Okay, thanks so much, Emily. Now I'm excited to introduce June Grant. June is the principal of Blink Lab, a firm which specializes in architecture, materials, and fabrication technologies. She's going to talk about her effort to get accessory dwelling units built, working with asset-rich but income-poor families of color who might have inherited a house but lack the resources to build an income-generating second unit on their lot.
Thanks, Maya. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks, everyone, for allowing me to present this project. As Maya said, Blink Lab, we're primarily a research-based practice, and Blink Lab was created after many years of working with large corporations. Primarily the one that influenced me to start on my own was AECOM, where as an associate principal, most of my projects were sustainable design projects, which assisted corporations but did not impact the local community. And so my interest in this project when it came to me was how to really save someone's house. And so the project, through talking to my client, I discovered a large part of the Oakland population were asset-rich and income-poor. And so my assignment was no longer to just design an in-law unit, but rather to understand what were the issues at play that were latent that we were not discussing. So as I said, the focus of the research was this group of population, which we're calling asset-rich and income-poor. And to understand the background of this is to understand migration and to understand the last economic downturn and the impact it had on the African-American community. The focus area is what we like to call Northwest Oakland, high African-American population. Most of these individuals inherited their homes. They're maybe third generation. But what has happened is that they are actually not high income earners, and as you can see from the stats, 50% of the population live on less than $35,000 per year. And what is key to understand is that the average income for the Bay Area is $97,000. And so these are individuals who are on the lower end, and the neighborhood is considered extremely low income. And so the challenge, which was originally to design an in-law unit, becomes a question of how do we create a strategy around housing retention, not just for my client, but for the larger population in that geographic area. The great thing and why my client was interested in an in-law unit was that the city of Oakland had recently changed our zoning to allow in-law units to be built at a larger scale and with an easier permit approval process, and to also acknowledge the fact that we were facing a rapid population shift, and the population of the Bay Area was expected to grow by 50% over a few decades, and we were not ready. The Bay Area requires 100,000 new units, of which the city of Oakland had built actually 500 in 1 year. So that tells you that we were not operating as fast as we needed to. So as you can see from the numbers, an individual who earns $15,000, which is actually 1/3 of my research area, 1/3 of that population live on less than $15,000. But they owned a home with a large backyard. And so they automatically recognized that they had the opportunity to increase their income if they could only build an in-law unit. And when we looked at the cost of building the in-law unit, we realized that the cost of the loan repayment was going to be only $600 per month, but the upside was the rent that they could rent the units out for. If they stayed with an affordable rent, they could rent it out for $1,000 to $1,500. If they decided to do market rate, it was going to be $2,500. That's an amazing income change for a population that earn below $15,000. That's a 32% increase minimum on their investment. So here's a sample of, this is actually the backyard of the client who came to me with this quandary. How was she going to save her house and get additional income? And so we actually conducted an educational program where she went out and researched the zoning, understood what it meant to build a unit in the back of her yard, what the maximum capacity that the city would allow, which was 800 square feet, And actually, she went out and figured out how much would it cost to build this, which was going to be $125,000 if she built a small cottage. But we wanted to look at this as a bigger issue because we recognized that there was a larger population at stake. And so we went out and looked at, well, what was the capacity of the entire neighborhood of her district, and how many individuals on her block would be interested in building in-law units. And it turned out that quite a few individuals on her block were interested in building, they just didn't know how. So she and I created cue cards to explain the process of building out and what would it cost and how to get a loan, and basically presented this package to the neighborhood. But what was most important was to understand where were they going to get the money from. And being African Americans, they faced a incredible uphill battle because we know the lending processes were not equal. We knew that African Americans who with the same FICO scores were being approved at a far lower rate, 33% versus 67% nationwide. We knew that African Americans who had FICO scores of 72 or higher were actually only 33% of the borrowers. So what that means is when you, as a African American, goes in for a loan, and even though your FICO score was similar to a white individual, you were actually going to be charged a higher interest rate. That higher interest rate means that you end up actually building a smaller building because that's all you can afford. And from the diagram on the left, you can see what that means graphically. Your ability to create wealth is increasingly hampered by the interest rate itself, in addition to the fact that you're highly unlikely to be approved. So what is being discussed in Oakland right now is at two levels. Alameda County is looking at a lending program, but the county program is looking at restricting property owners to a 55-year low rent restriction. That means you have a cottage in the backyard and you could only rent it out to low-income individuals. Now, my clients are not opposed to that, but what is the hamstring is that you're asking an individual who's already on the lowest rung of the economic ladder that they're going to be restricted an additional 25 years than if they had simply taken out a market rate loan. This is a huge ask for the population that has been systemically prevented from acquiring wealth, highly unlikely to increase their employment income, and you're adding a burden of they cannot shift. You're asking them to never, ever increase their own personal wealth as we help a growing population find housing. That's a double whammy. The second avenue that's being discussed is that nonprofit development agencies are looking at financing in-law unit construction, but what they're asking for is that they would like to retain the right to rent, and they will select who will occupy the unit, and they will pay the owners a rent. Now, on the face of it, that sounds fine. I won't have to think about who's in my unit. I will just receive a rent. But what actually this means is you will not be able to sell your property as easily as you would like. You have no say in who will be in your backyard, and someone else is restricting how you use your property. This is, in fact, if this was a firm going out for a loan to do a regular business loan, this would not be a loan. This is actually an equity position. It means your right of operating your property is now severely restricted. So therefore, these two pathways, the nonprofit development agency and the county, are actually not equitable solutions. You're asking the lower income population to take a higher burden of what we're going through the Bay Area. So after much research and looking at, well, how many cities have had success with ADUs? And we were able to find that Vancouver has an incredible rate. 35% of single-family homes in Vancouver have ADUs. But then we would like to get to that level, but how do we get there and find a more equitable and more transparent method? And the city of Santa Cruz is the only Bay Area city which we have found that has a program that provide loans through the city. They run the program, but the loans are backed by private banks. And you can go through, they will provide you a Sustainable Communities grant. That's what their program is called. It's tied into a larger statewide agency program. And then the loans are backed by a local bank. And this I find to be the most hopeful pathway for African Americans and people of color, is that if the agency is transparent, if the agency is the, I guess, the judge and jury and being the person that's going to have an equal eye to the application process, then we have eliminated discrimination based on race. And it's just a process of going through the agency. It also allows the city to be able to see, are units being built, and be able to manage the city better. And what I also like is that if the city is the agency that's running the financial package, there is trust, because the African American community has historically experienced discrimination from banks. And so this is another way of building trust through the community, or trust by the community, if the city is held responsible for the loan process. So last thing to conclude is that and it's a big if we really, really, really want to retain a diverse population in Oakland, then we have to find equitable financial mechanisms that support African American and underrepresented populations. And I think the Santa Cruz public-private partnership model is worthwhile exploring. And I know I've gone through this fast, and I want to talk about where we are going next, because we're really excited about this. The success of having done this research with a single client is that now agencies are really closely looking at in-law units and how to finance them. I've made agencies aware of the ask, that the tremendous burden they're asking African Americans and people of color to assume. The upside is the population is interested in building in-law units, and we have identified a prefab factory that might be able to even reduce the cost of the units even more. So the policy discussions are being held and the financial discussions are being held. And so now it's a matter of getting the city of Oakland to pay attention to what their role might be. And thank you everyone for participating in this. I've really enjoyed listening to everyone's presentation and what they're doing. And I'm finding it really inspiring. And thank you, Mia, for allowing me to participate in this event. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, great. So these are fantastic, and we've now got a little bit of time to do questions and discussion. This webinar is going to close up at 2:15 p.m. EST, so it gives us a little bit of time to talk. So we really want this to feel like a discussion. So for all of you who are listening, if you've got questions or comments, please drop them into the Q&A panel. You know, it'd be great to hear about what you're working on, or if you want advice or insight on a specific project or initiative that you're working on. For us, this conversation would be successful if we helped you who have your own initiatives or who want to kickstart your own initiatives to be able to figure out and to take the next step on those initiatives and to make them, to either start them or to make them more successful. So please add in some questions. So I think the first question that I want to start with, I actually want to pick up with June's presentation. So some of you may not know, although you may have suspected, that June actually came into her design work with a bit of a financial background. So she thinks a lot about the financial systems and structures behind that allow these projects to either happen or not happen. So I think we saw in all of the initiatives today that they require some kind of expertise that comes from outside the design world, and they involve some sort of multi-sector collaboration. So my question is, where does your role as a designer end, right? Obviously this involves, these are much bigger systemic problems than just design solutions will fix. So maybe we'll start with June, but I'd love to hear from the other presenters. How do you know where to scope your work within this larger systemic issue of generating greater racial equity?
That's a good question, Mia, because it's what makes me very tired. I prefer to spend my entire day just designing. If I didn't have to have a client, I'd be the happiest person, just sitting here designing what I want. But but I'm also a problem solver, and I see that there's no single design effort where it's just itself, the object, and it's without context. And for me, what I try to do is identify the various issues I see, and then I pretty much go out and try and find people who can take it on, because really what I'm trying to do is offload all the work that I don't want to do so I can get back to design. So, and I'm not flippant about it. I'm actually quite serious about it. I dive into the issues because I want the consultant or whoever to take it on to recognize that I've identified some crucial things that I want them to tackle and to tackle seriously. And so the design work never truly ends, because in order for me to design the unit, even the in-law unit, I need to understand, well, how much money do I have to spend? Will they be able to maintain this? Will they be able to rent it? It's no different from any of my other clients where I didn't have to worry about the financing of it. I still had constraints. And so design never ends for me. There's always a question that's not been resolved, even though we have, handed the key over and the client's moved in. There's still something that wasn't resolved to my satisfaction, and so that it gets thrown into the next project. So design never ends for me, but I'm constantly trying to find consultants that I can shove like the economics piece into their lap so that it's in their wheelhouse and it's their job to figure out the ins and outs. And yeah, so it never ends. It just gets a dashed line around it, but it never ends.
Yeah. Do any of the other panelists have thoughts on this question of where does your job end? Emily, maybe, or yeah, Tamaya?
Yeah, this is Amy here with Tamaya. I would say, this is a really important question for us at DI, and as an organization that is obviously kind of in the social design, social innovation space, working to solve complex social problems, we've realized the need to actually really diversify our staff. And so by design, we are a multidisciplinary team. So about half of us are designers by trade and training, and half of us come from a variety of different disciplines and backgrounds, everywhere from Tamaya's in government, and currently running for city council, she's about to win, to social justice educators and social researchers. And so I think that speaks to how we understand, basically our work and what it means to start to solve, as June said, these problems, because ultimately that's what we're here to do and that's the business we're in. And so there's no way we can do that just, working in a silo in design. So.
And so I guess from a almost, Emily, you had some thoughts?
Sure. I hear two different questions. The first one being sort of as June said, the dotted line we put around design. It makes me think actually just this weekend, my husband and I we realized we were miscommunicating about talking about someone being an idea person, because I think an idea person, that's something I aspire to be. I think it's a positive thing. And he thinks of an idea person as someone who can't figure out how to get it done and hands it off to someone else. And so this term, we were seeing it from opposite perspectives, and I think so much of that comes from my real training is in a very very design-based background, and his is in construction. And so to me, I think the reason that we actually get along, though, despite that disconnect that we figured out, is that I think design is problem solving. I actually don't think that, I think that the way June is thinking about financing and the thinking that Tamaya can bring to Cincinnati City Council is design. And that there's never this moment where we get to say, the room should look like this, but I don't know or care about anything else. So I think those things have to be intertwined. But I think the other thing you're asking, Maya, is when do we say we have to have a partner in this? And for us, it's just a question of responsibility. There is such a lack of capacity all different ways where we are in the Mississippi Delta, but really just in that there aren't a lot of organizations. For example, there is no nonprofit affordable housing organization. There is, in the Delta, there is not a single nonprofit low-income housing tax credit developer in the state of Mississippi. And so a lot of times we do it ourselves. We completely do it ourselves, but at the moment that we feel like we're being irresponsible, that's where we draw the line. We say, do we actually know enough to be doing well, or are we the best person to fill this void?
Yeah, I love that. Do we know enough to be doing well, right? Like that is a litmus test. So, so I think as a follow-up, let's say, you know, I think that there are designers out there who are working on issues and all of a sudden they've run into, oh man, this is a really big tangled knot and there's a lot of pieces to it. And maybe this is a great question for either June or for Tamaya and Amy. What do you do next? And what do you do next in terms of how do you operationalize it? Because at the end of the day, you need to be at least at some level of profitable business. Whether you're a for-profit or nonprofit, you still need to pay the bills, right? So what's your next step when you run into one of these big issues where you realize that it's a much bigger problem than you, and maybe you can be a responsible solver of it? How do you suggest that we step-by-step walk through that process, especially for designers who are out there who come across these issues and they really want to address them, but sometimes it feels like it's bigger than just them?
I'll take this is June.
Go for it.
I'll take a stab. I'll give an example of there was a project in my past where the client wanted to do the most innovative, environmentally responsible building that they could, but of course we had limited budget. And so the experience on that project where we were able to do it came down to my understanding the flow of money, but also being willing to reach out and ask others, well, who do you know and what should we do and how do we scope this? And so now that I'm on my own and without 1,000 people to ask questions, what I have found, especially with the in-law units and another project, a library project, is that I am actually building community capacity where I'm teaching and mentoring individuals in the community about how to present, how to project manage, how to organize, because that was work that needed to be done in order for me to be able to design the ADU or the library for the client. Was that the client didn't know they didn't have skill sets. And so what I find myself doing is teaching the client skill sets that are required on their side, but also identifying nonprofits to team on my team in assisting the community to build their own skill sets. And that's how I've been doing it. I keep calling it the layers of the onion, where each week it's almost, okay, that's another layer of the onion that we've skinned, that we're teaching the community. Because a large part of my work is working with the community, and the reason why they're lacking so much is that they don't have the educational skill sets that the wealthier population has. And so what we're trying to do is backfill by teaching, and so that's how I've been doing it, is when I recognize that it's beyond my capabilities, but I recognize that there are individuals who can learn, then I try to offload some of that project management and skill sets ideas to the client so they can take it and learn and build and become more, I guess, build their strength and capacity within the community, and to be able to be vocal, but also strategically vocal. And so that's how I've been approaching it.
I think one of the things that we do when we are working with clients, we have a program that we have called Studio C. And within Studio C, it's where we help organizations who may not have the money to hire us, you know, just outright on a project. It's an incubator for organizations to learn design thinking tools so that they can approach the challenges that their organization faces as it relates to solving challenges. So one of the things that we do to help kind of narrow, because sometimes challenges are really, really big, we do a couple of, we equip them with a couple of tools that can help make really big problems seem a little bit more approachable. One of which is we do something called quadrant mapping, where we're asking them to think about their challenge or what they're trying to accomplish, but in the space of, in quadrants of, low interest, low power, high interest, high power, in terms of who to even engage, because sometimes we find that people are trying to engage, organizations are trying to engage the wrong people, which sometimes results in a waste of resources. They think they really want to contact the City Hall, because City Hall is who they really, really want to talk to. They have to talk to the mayor. Well, when you step back and take a look at it, how much does the mayor affect what you're trying to do? But they think because it's the mayor, they want to talk with him, or they might, or him or her. And then there might be instances where there's a population that has, maybe they have high interest but low power. So that's maybe where you can spend more time. So it's just helping them to figure out where the best place is to spend time, because the project, what they're trying to accomplish may be so big that might not be, they have to figure out where to put their time and their resources. And then the second, or one of the other tools that we use, is kind of looking at like a root cause analysis and trying to figure out, okay, this is our challenge, but as you said, June, kind of peeling away the onion, the layers to the onion, to figure out, is there a certain part of that problem that you want to attack, and being strategic and smart in your approach, understand that you don't have unlimited resources. Your resources are finite. So, and time and money are the two constraints that I guess we run into both personally in our own lives, but then as an organization. So that's where we try to steer people, and even within our own practices, thinking about who we should engage in, and where we even start is, are we asking the right question? We've had instances where people have higher design impact because they know that this is the one thing that they know in their heart it has to be done this way. But once we start talking to the end users or the actual clients, we find out that that one thing that they thought was the challenge wasn't at all. And so I think it's a matter of figuring out who to engage, figuring out what part of the challenge you want to attack, because some things are can be so overwhelming, and then making sure you're asking the right questions so that you can frame the question right, so that you can even try to peel away at potential solutions.
Yeah, that's really, really useful. So I've got a question from Amber Jones, who says, and I think this may be directed towards June, but I think it probably comes up in Emily's work and maybe even to Maya and Amy's work. Have you seen or explored crowdfunding or impact funds as a workaround for the inequities in the financial sector? And I think, I kind of joked at the top of the hour when I said, the challenges that we see are obviously challenges of funding and staff time, but I think it's an interesting question. Are there workarounds, whether it's those two suggestions that Amber's throwing out there, or other workarounds that you see for applying design thinking to the financial system that can allow or disallow some of these outcomes?
Okay, June, I'll take that. Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have not used yet crowdfunding, but we are for the library and for the in-law unit projects. Yes, funding is and being strategic around it has been a learning experience. We started the practice as a for-profit company, like most individuals do, and but with a huge desire to work in the community. And once again, following the path of funding, I recognized that in order for me to work with communities, many grants were only being provided to nonprofits, and we were actually in the process of converting the firm from a for-profit to a benefit company. And so, so that we can take advantage of these additional funding opportunities. So in addition to that, we're teaching communities how to become their own 501c3 so that we can together go after larger grants and funding opportunities. And so we're unfortunately exercising a lot more of my financial history than I ever wanted to while doing architecture. but it is the next step for us. Once we have my firm converted to a benefit company and the local community established in the 501c3, once we also have designs ready to preview, we will be doing crowdsource funding. Right now, what we're doing is picking low-hanging fruit. We have local grants, about $800. We've gotten a $1,000 grant, and we're going to be doing a pop-up library to start getting eyes on the project and the issues. So basically, because this is our first effort of teaming with communities to go after grants, we're going after the tiny grants and then hopefully go after larger grants until we get to the point where we're going after $1,000 and $1 million grants. But we will be doing crowdsource funding as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I think this is actually a pathway that I've seen social impact design organizations go through, where you can dream up the huge approach and all the things that need to happen, but actually treating it like a multi-phase project where each phase brings on new partners, maybe takes on a new baby step of a larger issue, because each phase can actually generate support for the next phase and generate a kind of credibility or track record approach. So we've got just a few minutes left. So I think I want to put one more question to our panelists, which is let's say you're out there, you're listening to this webinar, you know you are passionate about this issue, maybe you're working on this issue on your weekends, you know, you're at protests or just highly engaged in your life as a quote-unquote civilian, but you want to use your design skills to focus on this issue. What is your next step? What is the first thing that you suggest people who are listening today do?
And this is Emily.
Yeah.
I think
go for it.
Very personally, I'm white, and the people in the communities I work with are, you know, by the vast majority Black, and I really care about racial inequities, really care about gender inequities, and I didn't know how to enter that world for a long time. So for me, it was, the first step was about building relationships. It was just about, I think that I love reading the meta themes, sort of what's and hows, because the idea of having a real relationship, somebody trusting you and you being dependable to them, that's such an important step. So my work in racial inequity and responding to racial inequity has been so much about sitting on porches and developing relationships, primarily, of course, with, you know, local Black people of all ages, you know, men and women, and saying, you know, what do you really need, and you know, how can I plug in as an ally?
Any other thoughts or responses? Yeah.
Well, I just would totally echo that, Emily. I love that, and think that, you know, really social change starts with relationship building, and so I think that is to understand kind of where we fit and how we can contribute and support each other. It really starts with that. So, yeah, thanks for speaking to that.
Yeah, I echo that too, is that the trust comes from spending time in the most casual ways. Sometimes, you know, we have something called porch bears, which you probably do have over there as well in Mississippi. Because what you're dealing with is perspectives, my perspective of you, your perspective of me. And it's through building those little moments that add up to meaningful, long-term understandings and relationships and passion and love. And that's what I recommend for anyone who wants to use their design skills to have social impact or any impact, or just to exercise your talent, is that it takes building relationships, and that means spending time with as many individuals as you can, but being consistent and being open and honest is the way to go.
So I want to say thank you to our panelists, and I also just want to leave everybody, if they want a next step, we just this summer launched the latest installment of the Design for Equity initiative. It's a downloadable meal kit. You can download it on our website at the link you see. and it's a kit to have some important conversations over a meal. So the reason it's over a meal is because that's a great place to be doing this relationship building and this trust building is when we break bread together. And we designed it so that your community or your office or your project team could sit down together and talk about how issues of race affect your work as a social impact designer and how you as individuals, but also as a project team or an office or a community could be more proactive forces for equity. So you can download it on our website. We would love to know if you've had the meal. We'd love to hear what you discussed and see photos and you know, evidence of your impact or just even your open questions. We really feel like this is a really important issue for the design community and the communities that we work in to face and to take on head on in a really proactive way, but also in a really emotionally intelligent way. So we would love, we're happy to convene this conversation and kick off this conversation, but we hope that it's an ongoing conversation. And we want to, all of the panelists want to invite you to reach out if you've got any specific thoughts or questions for us. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to Impact Design Hub, Enterprise, and to all of the panelists for being here and sharing their initiatives. And have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, you too.
Thanks, Maya.
Thanks, everybody. This concludes today's live online event.